so we don't run out. Hello, class. Welcome back. I'm Jill, and I want you to meet Kate Piper, who is she is the subject expert in all things related to trauma and grief and the things related to law enforcement and fire. She has been out on the fire lines in California, and I've seen her out on those fire lines from her videos, and she's in danger zones, and she does it because she has this heart that says these folks need to have support now and they need support later. She is an expert in EMDR. And when we were talking before I hit the record button, she said, I told somebody that I was going to do this interview and it was going to be short because, yeah, my people don't talk about grief. So we're going to talk about how they don't talk about grief and what helps with them. Kate, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I only see first responders, first of all, and I'm certified in doing critical incident stress debriefing and management. So I'm one of those subject matter experts that gets called out when California Highway Patrol has an incident involving a child or an incident involving one of their officers wants to is thinking about ending their life, or there's a multi fatality incident, or I did also for PG&E out here, which is the electrical company out here. I did 6 weeks of base camp work, critical incident stress debriefing management at the PG&E base camp during the Paradise Fire, and then helped with nurses and hospitals through that, and then also worked with California Highway Patrol officers who thought that they were going to be dying during the Paradise Fire because it was surrounding them. So I do trainings for agencies. I do the critical incident stress debriefing management, love doing that. And then I also do for fire and for law enforcement officers. And then I have the privilege of doing EMDR work for first responders, which I absolutely love. I absolutely love having a first responder come in and be so overwhelmed with maybe 20 years of law enforcement or 20 years of fire. And I love doing that work and helping them work through to the place where they can decide if they want to be out of their job, or they can decide if they want to do this work and then continue on in the first responder world. So that's who I am, what I do. I don't know how I got to be a subject matter expert. I think it just happened with time and training and just passion, just being, just loving working with people, and specifically with first responders.
I remember seeing you out on Paradise on the fire lines and messaging you and saying, "Are you safe?" We've got family members
I
who just
wasn't.
lost their homes. We've got family members who lost loved ones. We know there are fire department guys out there who aren't defending their own homes and are watching them burn down and are protecting other places. And we've got hospitals being evacuated. What are you doing out there, Kate? And what did Kate say?
I'm just doing the good work that, these people need help. They do. Well, actually, it wasn't only California Highway Patrol officers and the CAL FIRE experts, but it was also the PG&E linemen were going out, and they were horrified by what they were seeing. And I just got a call this week. I'm going to be seeing somebody that is still recovering. That was 2018 was the Paradise Fire, and I'm going to be seeing somebody this week that was working the PG&E lineman. It was at the base camp. So I mean, it still goes on.
It does. And I will say, for those of you who were on the East Coast or in the Midwest, Paradise Fire was so big that the ash was falling in other states.
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
getting ashfall in Southern California.
Mhm.
It was the most horrific fire. I think it only compares to Canadian and
Yes, and
Australian.
yeah, 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 85 people lost their lives within hours. I mean, it just roared
There
through.
was no way to get out.
Right. No.
Absolutely no way to get out. And there's Kate out on the fire line. She was so smoky and smudgy, and she just looked like
You know,
Smokey's best friend.
yeah. And I got to, when you ask, am I safe? Like now looking back on it, I had just done breast cancer radiation. So then
Right.
I was out there with an N95 and I had no business being out there.
None.
But I would do it again. I know that
Mhm.
I would do it again. And I know that I've done it since. I mean, and I know like uh not very long ago, I was called up, hey, we have an officer that just got beaten up and pretty much left for dead. Will you go up and meet him at the hospital? And I told the personnel department, that called me up, and I said, yeah, that's what I do. That's what my business is set up, so that all of my clients, I only see first responders. And the response that I get when I say I have a critical incident that I need to be at, the response I always receive is, thank you for being there for us.
Thank you
So
for going and reschedule
yeah,
me, please. Right.
yeah,
Right.
yes.
So
Tell
tell me
Kate to
how
be
it
safe.
that's
Yeah.
right. Tell me how it is that you approach even talking about grief with a community, and how many communities there are within the communities that you
Mm.
are dealing with, because we talked a little bit about that, and Cami in her interview talks a little bit about the community of law enforcement, but there's more than just the community.
Well, there's the community, then there's the community's children and spouses, but then the community of law enforcement, like I was sharing with you,
Hmm.
um, you have, in fact, my husband, just recently, he said, why is that CAL FIRE guy, which that's, California, the fire agency that works across California. He said, why is that CAL FIRE guy have on a badge and a gun? And I said, well, that's CAL FIRE law enforcement. They are the ones who go out and investigate if there are people who are committing arson and nefarious activities like that. So that's CAL FIRE has their own law enforcement agency among themselves. Forest rangers also have that. So,
Hmm.
so then you have forest rangers and law enforcement, and their trauma is, you would think, oh, you're out there with Yogi Bear, how dangerous can it be? And then you don't realize that there are really dangerous people out there in our state parks and our national parks. And so they're exposed to a lot of trauma. I think that, okay, I'm going to finish this and then I'm going to go back to the forest rangers. So they're exposed to a lot of trauma. And then you have you have your state police, and then you have your county, sheriff's deputies,
Hmm.
and then you have um, your municipalities, and then the municipalities like the cities, like you might have a city like Sacramento, or you might have a smaller city like Auburn, where I'm working from right now, or Grass Valley, and every agency has its own nuances, and they're not, it's just not one size fits all. Yeah.
They each
In
have their own
fact,
personalities, they each have their own leadership, they each
and then
approach supporting their teams differently.
right, right. And the ripple effect of, like you might say, oh, wellness and California Highway Patrol. is doing so well with wellness and promoting and recognizing that their officers need treatment, and they're promoting all of that. Well, guess what? Then they get a new commander, and then everything changes again. And that
Mhm.
happens within all of the municipalities, and that happens pretty much within a little less within the fire departments. But it's still like it still happens, and you have to be prepared as a professional to swing with those changes and not take those changes personally, which I might not be an expert at that, because I might think this is really ridiculous. You need somebody that's actually going to take your wellness program, which is like, to me, it's like that's the heart of your first responders. So why are you promoting people out of that position and putting people who don't know anything about wellness into that position? That should be a really sacred position. So
And you need a
sometimes,
meeting with me, and I'm coming in to share with you what needs to be done, which is something anybody who's in this class should be thinking about, as something you advocating is really
mm,
important to make sure our responders are taken care of.
yeah, in fact, in particular with the California Highway Patrol, they have, it used to be, I don't know what the number is, but across California, they have 52, they call it their short list. So I'm on the short list of, across California, there are 52 therapists who have been vetted by California Highway Patrol to see to do the critical incident debriefing and be referred to, accept referrals for their traumatized officers and dispatchers. And one of the vetting processes is, and you learn this when you go through the international critical incident stress debriefing training and all of that. But one of the vetting questions is, how do you approach a commander, or how are you going to talk to a commander who wants to know how it's going with their officer? Or who a commander is reaching out and wants you to see someone in their department, and all of that. You have to be able to maintain your ethics um, and maintain a relationship with your clients. And then you also have to be able to be a little alpha. And I I didn't appreciate it when one of my clients told me, "Wow, Kate, you're rather alpha," but I am, and I don't
You
have a
have to
problem with.
be.
Yeah, you really have to be. You have to advocate for your clients. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that a lieutenant reached out to me and said, "Hey, who are you seeing from our department?" And I said, "I'm not at liberty to tell you that." And I didn't want to say, "Are you freaking kidding me? Why would you even ask me that?" But that,
Right?
my brain was like, this is why they need to stop just hiring people who don't know what they're doing in these wellness communities. But you have to back up, and you just say, "Hey, Lieutenant, under California state mental health guidelines, I can't answer that question."
Mm-mm.
So then they're no longer taking it personally, because the chain of command would be, "I'm the commander, tell me who you're seeing." And the reality is, you don't trump my licensing board,
You're not my
so
commander. You're the
you're
commander I
not
work
you're not
with.
my commander. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know how many times, on that note, I don't know how many times when I was working with that national wildlife, or not national wildlife, what are they? Oh gosh, my brother-in-law works with them, but the National Forestry Department, right? So I would do trainings on resiliency, or I would do trainings on different things with them. You could communication skills, conflict resolution skills, anything like that. And the person who would send me out would say, "I just want to protect you, Kate. I just want to protect you, and tell me the nuances. And I'm just like, yeah, I get it. You want to protect me, but on the other hand, what are they going to do? They're going to fire me, or what's going to happen? Like,
Mhm.
here come everybody and they're going to take me away. Anyway, you just have to maintain your professionalism and keep it, keep it, keep it as clean as possible and respectful as possible. I do love the chain of command. I wish, more, I wish mental health professionals, kind of understood that there's a reason for that chain of command, and it can be really respected. And on that note, just because somebody's at the top of their chain of command does not mean that they know what they're doing when it comes to wellness, and can really advocate for their officers or their firefighters. So it's our jobs to respectfully walk into that with them. And that's a privilege. I love doing that work.
It's an honor to be asked, and it's a privilege to do the work. And it
Yeah.
takes an awful lot to be able to walk that line, and also to educate those who want to help, who don't know the line and don't know the chain of command, and
Right. Right.
want to help in a crisis and should not be there and need to be backed out.
Yeah. Yes. And giving them giving them the guidelines, giving them, hey, I would love to talk to you in a hypothetical, about the nuances of walking an officer through what your officer is going through. I can talk to you hypothetically about what to watch for all of your officers without breaking confidentiality for the officer that I'm working with or the firefighter that I'm working with. And that's been the most effective way for me to address that issue. I work with
Mhm.
I work with probably off the top of my head. I'm probably currently working with 5 different fire department agencies and 10 10 10 or 11 different law enforcement agencies. So it's very interesting.
Is there a
And
significant difference between fire and law enforcement in terms of what the needs are and the, the approach you take and
mm,
how willing they are to come in for assistance?
well, especially right now in today's climate, to just recognize that most law enforcement officers feel and truly do have a target on their back.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I heard statistically that in the last couple of years, there were more line of duty deaths, and that hasn't been true for law enforcement officers. More line of duty deaths that have happened in the last couple of years than have happened in previous years before. And I don't know the exact statistics. It used to be that there were less line of duty deaths for law enforcement officers than there were officers who chose to suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So that's no longer happening.
They flipped.
They flipped, and law enforcement officers are and their families are in an environment right now where reaching out, it is so important that we maintain confidentiality, and that we sit there knowing a firefighter comes in and a firefighter is considered the good guy, and when we see the red lights for the law enforcement officer, I mean, myself included, we don't automatically think, oh, goody, a
Right.
law enforcement officer is here. We automatically think, oh my gosh, what what did
What
I
I do
do?
wrong.
Is everything
Right.
okay? Yeah, which is really interesting. On a side note, um, recently, a person from a fire department in my local, uh, area, I want to be as discreet as possible, and this happens all over the place, but was actually arrested for exposing themselves. And it turns out that they're on Megan's Law. They were actually a registered sex offender, which I didn't know, but one of our major state fire agencies does not do background checks, and they sometimes hire registered sex offenders. I was like, oh
Wow.
my
I'm blown
gosh.
away.
And oh, you're blown away, and you should maybe be a little, I was a little alarmed. I'm like, well, that needs to change last year or 5 years ago, that needed to change. Um, and it's such a small community that particular person, I had a client that I was actively telling my client, you need to report them. You didn't ask for that. And so it ended up that they were arrested. Okay, well, that's great that they were arrested, but the fact that they were already a sex predator, I was just like
Allowed to see people in some of the most
appalled.
vulnerable moments.
Okay, and yes, like I'm like, oh, so
Yeah.
and that brings out also another thing of grief that all of us need to understand, regardless of whether they're, especially with law enforcement right now, but with fire, but with law enforcement agencies across the United States. Um, one of the griefs that you will need to walk your um, law enforcement officers through is agency betrayals. An
Hmm.
agency betrayal, when they show up, they will automatically think, other agencies probably don't experience. I just got in an officer involved shooting. My life was at jeopardy. I was put in the position where um, I had to take care of the threat, and a person died, right? And the next thing that will go through their mind is whether their agency has their back or not. Whether
Am I
their
going to be
agency,
prosecuted? Hmm.
yes, whether their agency has their back, that's going to be one of the things. And then whether the community will have their back. And that is a horrible, horrible trauma and grieving process of just recognizing this isn't what I signed up for.
Hmm.
I didn't sign up for I signed up to serve and protect. I didn't recognize that in serving and protecting, I might be exposing myself and my family to scrutiny and to agency betrayal. And that's just a deep grief. I mean, you think about the abandonment that people feel from their families. Okay, we're a brotherhood, um, for lack of
Right.
we're a community. We have each other's backs.
We
And
are a family of law enforcement, but
yeah,
now
yeah, right up until you do something wrong, and then you're going to be
out.
prosecuted. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
And the people that you thought were going to stand by you, and in both fire and police, there's when you come in as a young pup, there's usually someone who mentors you,
yeah,
and and that person may also join in that betrayal.
right. Yes. The difference between a firefighter and a law enforcement officer, according to my daughter, who is ROP, she's a fire science, she has a degree in fire science, is do you know why firefighters were created? We all know, because law enforcement officers needed heroes. So there you go. That's the difference.
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about the kind of things that you see in terms of naming grief and naming trauma and being able to make that accessible
Mm,
to someone who wears a badge, whether it's forest service or law
right.
enforcement or fire,
I don't.
paramedic, even someone who's in the dispatch room. You're the first
Oh,
one to bring that
definitely.
up because dispatchers have such trauma that they hear and
Yes.
can't hear being resolved.
Right, right. So I won't bring it up as grief. I
Mhm.
will say how many, I won't even use the word grief. I will, I might not even say trauma for a while. And even when I explain post-traumatic stress injury, I don't say disorder, I explain injury, and how the brain changes because of what you just experienced from your career. So we talk about that. I talk about whack-a-moles. So I will say to an officer that has 15 years, on highway patrol, I will say, so tell me about when you go to sleep at night or when you're driving in the area, or it's a fire fighter and he's worked in the local area. And I'll say, when you travel in the area, tell me about the whack-a-moles. How many incidents come up in your mind that you think, oh, that's where that person burned to death there. Oh, that's where I rescued that 2-year-old. Oh, that's where that ATV was. Oh, that's where, and they will automatically start telling me the list.
Mm-hmm.
And they appreciate the fact that it's not that it's happening. I mean, for the majority of the officers and firefighters that I'm working with, it's not happening constantly, but like with
But
one
it
of my,
sits there.
yes, with one of my CHP officers, definitely it was a 5-year-old little girl that would come into his dreams probably 3 times a month. And it happened to be a 5-year-old girl that was trapped in a car, that he held the hand of the girl, and there was nothing to be done, and he held her hand while she died. And that memory would visit him in different ways about 3 times a month. And he came into my office not because of that. He came into my office, and they're not usually coming in. So tell me why you're here. My wife said I had to come. I'm being
Mm-hmm.
too grumpy, and my wife said I had to come. I'm like, oh, so you're here because your wife said you needed to come. So how many years do you have as a firefighter? And then we'll start the conversation. And I won't say, look, you've got unresolved grief. I mean, I will say that now.
Mm-hmm.
I saw somebody today that they're 5 weeks into seeing me. 5 weeks into seeing me, and I've probably seen them 12 hours. Um, so that's pretty significant, because
Right.
I've set aside those hours to see them, and we're diving into the trauma, and now
Mm-hmm.
they can recognize they've never allowed themselves to grieve. Okay, so one thing that I share with them is, remember Inside Out, right? Remember that movie Inside Out. So when you have Inside Out, talks about joy and sadness and worry and fear, no, worry and disgust and anger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when joy kicks out, I always share them with this. There's nothing wrong. You're doing what all of us do. But joy kicked out sadness, and then you were left with worry and disgust and anger. And this is
Mm-hmm.
what you're looking like to the world.
Right.
And this is why your wife or your partner, or this is why they're asking you to come in. And then I will explain. So somehow we need to let sadness be part of the repertoire of your career and of your life. And a lot of times people will just, they'll just weep. I have the privilege of working with really strong heroes who just weep. And sometimes, I'm having all sorts of flashes, Jill, because I just worked with one military, and then prison guard, right? And prison guards experience horrific trauma.
Yes, they do.
Horrific trauma and horrific grief that it's just like, and the powerlessness that they experience. So I worked with one, I don't see very many of them. I have my own reasons. And I worked with one, he was suicidal to the point where he got drunk and he drove off one of our mountain roads up here.
Wow.
So he's quite serious. And that was 3 years ago. And he was also a Marine who did Fallujah. And actually his Jim Mattis, General Jim Mattis, was his general. I have that. I have the book Call Sign Chaos on my bookshelf. I just looked at that. But 3 years later, he's connected back to his family. I mean, his marriage split, but he's connected back to his family. He's talking about who he does want to be with and who he doesn't want to be with in the future. And he's experiencing
a future
happiness. Yes. And he's experiencing happiness and he's experiencing joy. But we had to walk through a lot of grief and trauma and allow him that space to just unpack all of that.
And that's not at all unusual when you have people coming in from these walks of life. A lot of them are fed into these careers from prior military experience. And so definitely. You have a lot of vets who have had trauma and grief and losses that they've experienced or witnessed or been part of. And then they move into this other field and it goes with them. And the military is not well known for providing terrific mental health care.
No, and that's really
to this
sad.
Day.
Yes, yeah. There is, I just heard from an EMDR therapist in Oregon, but anyway, there are private organizations who therapists can partner with, and they will help the veteran to do the workaround, and they will pay for the therapy that the veteran needs. But yeah, the veterans and that's the same with law enforcement. It's like to have therapists who are culturally competent, who want to work with first responders and are willing to read the literature and educate themselves and maybe do a ride along. Although I'm not a fan of ride alongs. I'm like, I don't need to see the brains. I don't need to be sitting in the patrol car while you go up and check for that. What am I going to do if you get shot? Like, what point is this? I'm getting traumatized. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go, I put the car in reverse and get out of there. I don't know. But even reading and talking to and just accepting first responders and their experiences helps. There's not enough first responder therapists. There are a lot of therapists out there who will see the symptoms that post-traumatic stress injury creates, and they will label the first responder as a narcissist.
Really?
They will, all the time. They will often, especially when Okay, especially when you talk about a firefighter. So a firefighter who is in their engine or their truck or whatever they're in, everything has to be just where it's going to be across the United States, right?
Right.
But definitely within a municipality and
Mhm.
different, and it has to be where it has to be, or somebody's going to die. They
Right.
can't just go, oh, where did I put my tool? Where did I? Everything has to be okay. So everything has to be where it has to be. Plus, if I'm a captain and I tell you to do such and such, I tell you to cut a line, we don't have time to discuss why I'm telling you to cut a line. You have to get moving and cut that line. Okay, so that's what that firefighter is doing for 36 to 48 hours straight, right? They're doing that, and then they come home, and let's say they're coming home to 3 kids and a partner, and the house is a mess. Okay, well, right there, we've got a problem, because things being chaotic, somebody could die. So, like, first responders themselves have to be really aware, and most first responders are not aware that that is coming into the home with them. They're not even aware that they're going through the emotional hypervigilance roller coaster on a shift by shift basis. And they're not even aware of how that impacts their relationships. All they're aware of is, I asked you, why isn't that over there? And I used my regular tone that I use for 48 hours straight, and nobody gets frustrated with me. And now you're wigging out because I used command presence accidentally with
Mhm.
you. So
It's,
Cindy
the
Doyle's,
military is like that too. So when
oh,
people come home from
definitely,
deployment,
definitely.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. But you think about law enforcement and firefighters, and their families are going through that on a regular basis.
Zoom, zoom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
And the whole family has to, I mean, I worked with one law enforcement officer. I worked with one CAL FIRE couple that I explained that, and the wife hit her husband, who was like had 15 years on and had been, CAL FIRE, since college, and said, get a different job. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. We're kind of saying cut off a leg and walk on something new. It's like, whoa, let's find a different way of doing this. But and I worked with one law enforcement officer who we needed to do the trauma therapy and the grief therapy, but we also needed to be realistic with the family. He was doing homeschooling when he came home, like the day after his shift. And I was like, do you love math? And he's like, I hate math.
Oh
Well,
my
why are
God.
you doing math with your kids? I get it that you want to homeschool them. Okay, cool. But let's do something less demanding of your psyche, and because that's kind of just like you're coming home and now you're set up to do an argument with your family. I had a really bad call. There's just, I got to man up and teach these kids. And I was like, oh,
And these kids
I
have
mean,
to follow and behave and get the work done.
yeah. And it's just not going to work. And
Mm-mm.
so the whole, like, when you're working with first responders, you're working with the whole culture. And Jill, I think you know me,
I
that
do.
I'm really big on generation, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
really big on family. I am so big on family. I
Right.
love my family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And so
The whole
it's
system needs to be treated.
the whole system needs to be treated, and it's such an honor to go, I know that therapist called you a narcissist, And the way you're doing command presence in your family would feel a little narcissistic. But what if you're just doing the best that you know how to do? And then the person
Mhm.
will start crying and letting me in and letting me know that like some partners will say, oh my gosh, you're the first person who's understood my partner, and I'm
Mhm.
like, well, yeah, I think that they can be a jerk, but we all can, and I'm not, I'm doing,
None of
I
us are
see,
immune from that.
no, none of us are immune from that. And like some of us are trained in our jobs to be polite and to be relational, and we're not in command presence mode
Right.
48 hours straight.
That reminds me, different group. I just spoke to the California state judges at one of their statewide conferences. And before I started, a judge from a different county walked up to me and he said, I just need, and somebody pushed him. One of the other judges said, you have to ask her. And he said, I just have to ask, am I broken?
Oh,
And I said, can
yeah,
you tell me
yeah.
why you would think that?
Mm,
And he said, I don't feel anything while I'm on the bench anymore. I don't have any emotional connection. And he
yeah,
only sees capital murder cases.
right, right.
That's his entire
Mm-hmm,
courtroom.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And he said, I hear these victims of crime statements from the survivors at the end of every trial. And
mm-hmm.
I know they've been through awful, and I can't connect anymore. And I said, how long have you been doing it? And he said, 30 years. I've been on
Wow.
that bench for 30 years.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
his wife was with him and was one of the one pushing. And I said, I think probably you're not broken. I think you've numbed up out of necessity. Do
Mm-hmm.
you feel it when you are home when you're home and he's old enough and the grandkids come over for a holiday? Can you enjoy that within
No,
reason? And he
no,
said, within reason, but then they get
right,
to be too much. I said, you are, it's time for retirement and we need to get you some help. But no, you're not broken. You're
right.
traumatized.
Yeah. And that's so you're traumatized and you have compassion fatigue. And then that
Off the
compassion
scale.
fatigue, right. And that compassion fatigue not treated will numb you out because
Mm-hmm.
you're not allowing yourself a ritual of in my trainings, and I'm sure in your trainings,
Mm-hmm.
a ritual of grieving, grieving that horrific yes, it's great that you did the investigation and that you watched the sexual assault videos that they had. That's great. Great for you that you are the hero that did all of that awesome detective work to put that person away. But you're going to keep doing that, and you're going to keep doing that, and you're going to keep doing that, and you are just going to flatline your emotions because you're not allowing yourself to just take that time to grieve um and meditate and actually take really good care of yourself. And
As a matter of fact, when I do trainings like that, excuse the background noise. We have a new rescue pup in the house,
oh,
and they're
okay.
not getting along right now. So if you hear snarling, it's play, but it sounds vicious. Um, anyway, I light a candle, and I have a
Mm,
stuffed dog with big brown eyes,
mm,
and we do some breathing and some connecting exercises to close it out and talk about the whole self-care thing because you have to, because
yeah.
otherwise they are just too numb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tell us about EMDR and what that does for these populations.
So, eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, and now we want to call it more like taxing memory. The research is showing that it actually should be we're taxing the memory networks. So when someone thinks about the worst teacher in the world who scolded them, or they might actually start telling about that situation, and actually their body's feeling those same feelings that they felt back then. So for instance, doing EMDR on the CHP officer who had the 5-year-old die while he was holding her hand. And mind you, he had a 5-year-old at home also. So taxing that working memory, what Francine Shapiro just discovered in the late 80s, I think it was. What she discovered is that when she focused on a disturbing event and moved her eyes back and forth, then she went back to that event, and she felt less emotional activation. And so that's when EMDR started. And then it became that reprocessing where instead of I should have done something, and having that intense, I should have done something, I should have been there for the person. Out here in California, there was a terrible line of duty death for 2 officers, one in Sacramento, deputy, a bad guy shot the deputy in Sacramento, and then he came up to Placer County and he shot a deputy up in Placer County. And then he held himself in, barricaded himself in a house and blah, 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 blah. Well, that was in, I think that was in 2014. I have probably done EMDR on that call. That day, I've probably done EMDR on 15 different people for that situation. And so there's so many officers who I was blockaded. I should have gone with that deputy, or the detective deputy that was shot. I should have been there. All those different things. But EMDR works that taxing memory, and it's really interesting. I was at a training with Rebecca Case, who is an EMDR therapist, just a couple weeks ago, Friday before last, actually. By the way, for your class, I'm the president of the Sacramento EMDR Regional Network out here. So
thank you for saying that. I'm so glad you did. I told you, subject expert.
Well, it just means that I can wrangle therapists into getting really great therapists here for the community of therapists. And it also means people trust and respect me up here.
Right.
But Rebecca Case said this great quote, and I forget who said it. She was quoting another person. But you know how Besser Vanderkolk says, the body keeps the score. And she we'll have to Google who said this, but it is really the brain keeps the score, and the body is the scorecard. And with EMDR, that's exactly what happens. Is when we start allowing our therapists, when we start allowing our clients to reprocess the memory, they think differently. Their bodies are activated, the scorecard is activated, and then they're allowed to reprocess the memory and think differently about themselves, about what they could have done, about what actually took place. With most of my clients, they go through, you can actually see them go through numb. You can, in 90 minutes, you can see them go through numb. And I know, Jill, you're not a fan of the Kubler-Ross thing.
Oh, I like the grief. I like the stages. They just belong in anticipatory grief more.
Okay.
But yes, but when you're doing unprocessed grief, they come through.
Yeah. So I mean, you can actually see somebody go through the shock and the denial, the anger, the bargaining. I mean, they just go through the whole thing. So when I'm doing EMDR and somebody says, I'm not feeling anything, I'm saying, just notice that, just notice that.
Mhm.
And eventually they'll be like, you know, I can't believe that that nobody called, you know, that nobody came, or, you know, whatever the situation is. I have like,
Mhm.
and then eventually they'll be able to work through that powerlessness into I did the best I could, or into I did mess up and I'm forgivable. And the beautiful thing about EMDR is the more that you do EMDR, you know that some things never go to a zero. Some things are never meant to be a zero.
Some things
They're
can't be
never
a
going to be
zero.
okay.
Yeah.
They're never going to be okay. So but they don't have to be a 9 or a 10. You don't have to live with a 9 or a 10 and be emotionally reactive the rest of your life. So the beauty of EMDR is you're helping somebody. I do EMDR intensives where I'll work with somebody for like 3 hours. So we'll do 90 minutes and then we'll take a break, and then we'll do 90 minutes and we'll process 2 or 3 events that have happened in their careers. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to do the EMDR and have that brain process that memory so that their Brodmann 19 is no longer lit up in the it's happening here and now.
Mhm.
And it's no longer lit up, but the memory is processed and it's no longer activated. They'll say, I'm not feeling anything. And I'll be like, yeah, that's because the EMDR is working. That's because it's working. And then they will leave my office feeling lighter or feeling more sane. Like that judge, I feel sad because I'm working with a law enforcement officer who says, you know, Kate, it's been packed down for so long. All of this trauma has been packed down, and now it's being loosened up because we've done probably 5 hours of EMDR, which that's exceptional. That's usually somebody that has childhood EMDR that is impacting their workforce, childhood trauma
Trauma.
that is affecting their workforce trauma. And in cases like that, the EMDR is going to go slower and it's more complicated, and you really have to know what you're doing. But it is possible, and the person will slowly start to even recognize, oh, I've had everything packed down. Now I'm starting to come alive. I'm having more recognition of what was really sad and what was really out of my control. But I don't know if that helps. Does that help?
It helps an awful lot. Lots of people don't know what EMDR is, and they've
Oh,
heard about it, and they've even seen it on a few television shows recently.
oh yeah,
But
usually poorly done.
right, right, really poorly done and faked out. One sec, I'm going to tell them to be quiet.
Oh, I'm not really hearing them, so I don't know if
You
other
can't hear
people,
them because
I
they are
can't hear them.
so. Then that works for me. They are
Yeah,
so loud. They need to know, people need to, who don't know EMDR need to know that it works, that with these populations, with this kind of grief and trauma, it is effective,
right.
that it's something they can recommend. How do they find, if I am a chaplain in and I'm a nurse or something, how do I find someone who does this?
Okay, so you go to emdria.org, and then you go find a therapist, and then you can find your different levels of a therapist. You can find therapists who are EMDR trained, and then you can find therapists who are EMDR supported, and then not certified, I'm sorry, and then you can find EMDR therapists who are consultants. I am a consultant. I offer some trainings, but I only offer trainings for therapists who want to work with first responders. And generally speaking, if they're certified, then if you're going to refer them to a first responder, you still need to make sure that just because they're certified as an EMDR therapist, that they go to a first responder, culturally competent therapist. Because I've been working with trauma for 30 years, and working with first responder trauma is very different from just working with trauma.
It
And
totally is. And you have
it,
to know their culture and what they face.
yes, you have to. And so you have to vet the EMDR therapist, and the EMDR therapist, you actually can go to the First Responder Support Network, and that's FRSN.network, I believe. I don't know. I'll double check that and send you that. But that has a list of therapists across the United States who are first responder competent. So whether it's brain spotting or EMDR or ART or whatever it is, they really need to be culturally competent. The amazing thing you said, Jill, what happens with EMDR real briefly is, so like that officer would come in and he would be carrying around the false guilt of that 5-year-old dying, right? And the fact that he couldn't do anything. And it's possible that anything that reflects that that triggers that trauma for him is going to be make him irritable. And so what we will do is we'll actually have him hold the memory of that event. And then I do old school EMDR. I will say, watch my fingers, and I will do some sets, and then I will pause. And it's most of the time what happens is the officers just start weeping because they start recognizing what they went through and what that child went through. And so then I'll check in with them, and slowly when we check in, I should have done something. Their anxiety and anger could be like from a scale of 0 to 10, it could be like an 8 or a 9. And then when we do this reprocessing, and we might go like this, if we're doing EMDR 2.0, we might tell them 5 plus 5 is, and they'll say 10 while they're remembering it. I mean, it's just, it's amazing how the research has evolved with EMDR. EMDR is the most research base of the trauma therapies out there right now.
Yes, it is.
But what will happen is that anger and that anxiety or whatever they're feeling will just come down with every pass that you're doing. And their true belief about I did the best I could will come up. So by the time that we're done, the anger or the sadness will most likely be a 1 when they bring that event to their mind, and they will say, I don't feel anything. And I'll say that's because the EMDR is working. And then I'll say, and how true does it feel to picture that and think I did the best I could? And then by the time that we're done processing, they will be at it feels really true. It feels really true. It's really sad, but I did the best I could. And then you're like, oh. And the beautiful thing about EMDR too is that it's like the brain is like a stack of cards, like a castle of cards, I guess you want to say, or a Jenga or something like that. So if I resolve this event, it's possible other events are going to be resolved while I'm doing that event. And then I resolve that, and then I'm not keeping them forever in therapy. They're like a year, they're 6 months, they're, you know, like my correctional officer, 3 years, but he's seeing me now, and we're basically doing like, how do you live without being a correctional officer, and how do you live now without trauma? And first responders need that too. They need to learn how to live without the trauma, learn how to live without feeling like they have to run and be the heroes anymore.
Not have
Which
to
is
feel like they
another,
have to be on guard all the time and
right,
prepared to lock and load immediately. They need,
right.
what is life like without that?
Yeah, yeah, which is another, it's another aspect of grief. I mean,
Right.
you know, it's just a loss of identity and another aspect of grief. And
And a loss of community.
a loss of community, definitely a loss of community. Usually the officers or firefighters, when a lot of the officers and firefighters and dispatchers and paramedics and even nurses have lost their community, and that's part of what we're grieving when they come in to see me, is they're the ones that have a lot of post-traumatic stress injury are coming to see me and have already lost their community and are dealing with the agency betrayal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know you heard that one. Or did you not? Nope. Wow, that was a loud
I
bark.
don't know.
Okay.
I'm not
One of the
hearing
things
it.
that one of the things that comes up is the moral injury when an agency betrayal occurs.
Yeah.
Feel like I'm being betrayed by my community and by my work community, my work family. There's that whole piece. Is that something that you can include in EMDR kind of approaches?
Well, we definitely include it in EMDR. It usually gets resolved just by resolving each of the traumas. And unfortunately it's more like in the 12-step program, it's more of to be reasonably happy this side and supremely happily on the other side. And it's more like having a peace with being powerless, or even in the Buddhist thinking of it's nothing is permanent, and just accepting that um boy, and that just never changes, does it? But just accepting that people are people,
And life
and
changes.
they're fallible, and sometimes they won't have your back. And if you have some people who really do have your back and walk you through and walk with you through grief and trauma, you have a very precious thing. But usually it's not going to be your command or your agency. Usually it's going to be those who have been through what you're experiencing.
Are the top 5 things that you bring up with someone coming from fire, and or maybe the parks, in terms of being able to um, identify trauma and losses that they've experienced? Are there
Um,
some top things that you bring in or you give space to?
I don't know if I don't know if I'm understanding. One of the things that I first will address with them is just the fact that if they're going through years of being the emotional hypervigilance roller coaster, the toll that that takes on themselves, and how they have, what are the skills that they've already done? What have they turned to for comfort? Then I will actually, I'm pretty thorough in what I do. So we start with doing a gratitude journal. I'll get them into the habits. So I teach them, you know, what are you eating? What are you drinking? Being in that habit, they'll be told to do 3 gratitudes every morning, 3 things that they're grateful for every morning. And then I will ask them to practice square breathing 3 times a day, 3 or 4 times a day. And square breathing or 4x4 breathing, where they breathe out to breathe into 4, hold it to 4, breathe out to 4, rest for 4. So they'll do that on a daily basis. We do that right from the start. Right when I see them, I want them practicing resiliency. Those are practical methods that research shows helps with resiliency. So now and then we're going to walk through trauma. And then I do ask them to meditate for 5 minutes every day. The square breathing is because when they start to have anxiety attacks, if they haven't had anxiety attacks, they will be training their body to concentrate on their breathing and to go into the square breathing rather than fighting off an anxiety attack or taking a pill. That's why I love that book, Resilience by Eric Greitens. I just love that book. Just the first chapter of that book. I play the first chapter of the book and he talks about Walker. You told me, I could probably recite it. You told me how you got up in the middle of the night and you cleared your house. You're not sure why. And then you broke into sweat, and everything like that. So we get those resiliency first. Then I do an assessment of, so how long have you been in as a firefighter? Tell me the worst incident that you've had. Tell me the first incident that you had, and tell me the last incident that you had. That was that I'm asking for the whack-a-moles. I'm asking for what visits them in the middle of the night, what visits them throughout the day. And we'll do that assessment. There, in the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, they teach that there are 10 things to watch out for first responders that you want to watch out for because they are more prone to be suicidal on these events. So where the United States of America and most industrialized countries, we want to mind our own business. We hear somebody just found out that their partner's cheating on them, and we want to mind our own business. That's a time to actually move in and check on them. Somebody's going bankrupt. They're having severe financial distress. We'll want to they mind their own business, right? Rather than move in. A pet dies or their favorite mentor dies. That's one of those critical incidents. They show up on an incident and it looks like it's a kid that is the same age as their kid, or it's a kid who looks like their kid, or a kid call of any kind. We want to move in and we want to check in on them. They show up to the incident and it's actually somebody that they know. We want to move in and we want to check in on them. They show up and it's a multi-casualty event. They show up and it's publicized. It's all over the media. Paradise Fire was all over the media. I couldn't listen to the radio, after doing base camp work for 6 weeks straight. I was just like, people would want to talk about the Paradise Fire. And I was like, I can't. I need to go watch a comedian. I need to go stare at a river. I need to go kayaking. I need to go have some fun and replenish myself. But if it's a high media involved event, if one of their firefighters or their law enforcement officer was injured, that's going to be an event where you want to move in. If there's a death, a line of duty death, of course you want to move in. And then the last one is, have you ever been under investigation? And that's when you want to move in. You hear that somebody's under investigation. You want to move in rather than have them mind their own business. So I I will ask them, tell me about the incidents, first, last, worst. And then I'll say, have you had any kid calls? I'll say, have you had any multiple casualty incidents? Have you had, I'll just bring up those events. And those are the events that I know. I will tell my firefighters or my officers, this would take anybody out, because that's what the research shows. It doesn't show that the research doesn't show that if you have 15 years and you were really tough, you would have been able to do this. It shows that it doesn't matter if you have 2 years or you have 20 years, you can be on a bad kid call and it will take you out. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that whatsoever. So
That's not
I think,
something anyone should have to see, but they're in a profession where that happens and they're the ones
right.
sent.
And they get to have the honor of being with that person sometimes in their last moments. And unfortunately, they get to experience the trauma of being with that person. And I've done a lot of officer involved shootings where the officer has a lot. I've done probably about 10 off the top of my head.
It's a lot.
Officer involved shooting where an officer has been put in the position where he had to shoot the person who he had to terminate the risk or the anyway, where someone died. And I have not been to one yet where an officer had any kind of any kind of that to it. It's devastating. And what I've experienced is, even if it's a good shoot, they're devastating, they're devastated and at some level, and their whole family is impacted by that. And so working again with the whole family, not just with the officer, but working with the whole family is really important. And then if the officer, so sometimes the officer will think, yeah, that's good. I know I did what I did and I had to do it and I was put in that position. And the officer will be in an okay position, but their children might be all of a sudden terrified and anxious because now I know what mom or dad does. And now I know it's dangerous and it
What they
never
face every
impacted me
day.
before. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes working with the families is the honor that you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've worked with
Love
some
all
of the
that.
families who've been out when we've had officers killed in line of duty, and they call out all the troops for the
Yeah.
officer to be taken to the coroner's office. And it's
Right.
hours after the shooting. And there are, people lined up on the streets. And that's the first time those kids have recognized that that could have been their parent, because there was a
Right.
kid in the car following that
Right.
hearse. Mm-hmm.
Right. And also those ceremonies of officer or firefighters line of duty deaths are so poignant and so rich. And then also helping your officers and your firefighters deal with the line of duty deaths, cope with the line of duty deaths in a way that honors their agency, honors the person who did lose their life, but also honors and recognizes this is one too many. This is just too many. So when I am working with someone that has the line of duty deaths, it's just one too many, and allowing them space to grieve that is going to be so important. I mean, one of my firefighters chose not to go to one of his buddies' line of duty death. And whether I agree with that or not, he was just like, I cannot listen to one more set of bagpipes. I'm done. So that was his own giving him space and allowing him to honor that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, my cousin's husband was a firefighter in New York on 9/11.
Mm.
And it was his group, his station, that was the one that lost the most
Okay.
firefighters. He
Mhm.
was out on disability, and so he was dispatching. And
Oh,
he
goodness.
dispatched his
Oh,
own team into what became the pit. It was a building at the
Right.
time.
Right.
And they continued to live in New York for another year and a half before he finally went out on disability because he couldn't take it anymore.
Mhm.
But the comment that my cousin made was there wasn't a day for 8 months where they didn't hear bagpipes.
Right.
Because every time they identified somebody, there was yet another funeral. And they knew they'd lost everybody, but they didn't do the ceremony till they had something that proved that person was in fact deceased.
Right.
She's like, she said, I can't go anymore.
Right.
I just can't do it anymore.
And
And her husband couldn't either.
I think
Mhm.
it's okay to give them permission to have that space of, yeah, you don't, let's figure out a different way for you to honor that person who was killed in the line of duty.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the truth, Jill. One of my worst fears is that one of my officers or firefighters who I consider mine, is going to be killed in the line of duty. And chances are it's going to happen. I mean, I've been a therapist up here for 30 years. When something happens to officers and firefighters up here, my family notices that. I say up here because Jill's in Southern California and I'm in Northern California, and it's like two different states in a lot of ways.
It totally
But
is.
yeah, it is. I mean, where I'm looking at the Sierras and Tahoes and
I'm
Tahoe, and
looking at the desert.
yeah, yeah. And but so my family's aware that when something happens to firefighters or law enforcement up here, I can't help it. I become hyper vigilant and I do my own grieving and process, even if I don't know the officer. If it's one of my officers or firefighters, I imagine I will be devastated. So anyway,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. And thank you for bringing up the needing to take care of oneself when one does this work
Oh,
as
absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. You have to be with other therapists or other, I mean, probably the only reason why I volunteer at the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat Center. It isn't because I don't have enough to do. Oh my gosh. But I volunteer there because they have, the director wrote, not the director right now is Doug Sear, and he's one of my good friends. But the founders, Helen Kirschman, Joel Fay, and then Mark, and I always forget his name, but they wrote Counseling Cops. Ellen Kirschman wrote, I love a cop. I love a firefighter. I mean, so when I'm volunteering at the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat Center, I'm working with therapists who have a passion for showing up for first responders, and I'm building my own network of quality people. You know, I've got Joel and Ellen on speed dial. You know, I had a firefighter a couple months ago who was suicidal and contacted Joel real quick. Hey, can you do a consult with me ASAP? And you just can't be in an island when you're working with first responders. You need to be working with people who respect it. I lost also, Jill, I mean, this isn't a surprise to you, but I lost when George Floyd, I will say this, was a horrific. I hate it that we call it George Floyd, because I think it needs to be Derek Chauvin, because he was the idiot, the murderer.
Right.
And I know we don't want to give him credence, but it wasn't it anyway. What I immediately thought, oh my gosh, you have just put a target on all of my officers' backs. And then for 2 years, I watched my African American officers, my Caucasian officers, my minority officers. I watched them be threatened,
Yes.
be spit on, have feces thrown on them. And some of their agencies had their backs and some of their agencies didn't have their backs. And then myself personally, I kind of laugh at this, but it broke my heart because I got a personal message from a therapist friend that I know that we know, and I considered her a friend. And she said, I was reaching out to her because I thought, I wonder how you're doing, because I know you're African American and this must be so traumatizing for you right now. So I reached out to her to find out she had unfriended me because I work with law enforcement officers and I must want every African American wiped off the planet. And so all of that to say is that if we're going to work with first responders, if we're going to work with the people who choose to have this career, we are sometimes going to experience the animosity of people lacking knowledge, people not knowing us and lacking knowledge and polarizing and labeling. And that's going to have us do our own grief. So we're going to be grieving sometimes because of what we're walking our clients through. And then we're going to be grieving sometimes about what people think about us because we choose to walk with first responders. And
absolutely. And
yeah,
while that I do work with some officers, and I'm somebody from another country that we know that is not as comfortable with weapons and guns in general, which is not unusual because we are the most heavily armed country on the planet.
right.
Said, so do you allow guns in your office? And I said, when I have law enforcement coming in to see me, they have requirements for their job that requires that they be armed. And so I have to be comfortable with working in their space. And so their space includes that they have a weapon somewhere most of the time. And I'm not going to be the one to tell them they have to disarm to come into my building.
Yes. Yeah. No, and that is something that as a therapist, you need to be okay with and comfortable with. I can't imagine telling an officer to leave his or her weapon
in their car.
No. I actually feel safer when they're here. I feel like, just today I had somebody show up in my waiting room and I was like, I don't even know who that person is. And then, my officer was like, are we in danger? And I went, no, we're good until I say we're not, but I thought I'm in good hands.
Right. Our first office when we opened our private practice was directly above a gun shop that every law enforcement agency used. And
Well,
so
there
we
you
had
go.
FBI and Secret Service and everybody on the planet there.
Mhm.
And so we'd see people walking in with, very large, long cases and lots of
Right.
little short cases. And it meant that when we went out at night and it was dark and that parking lot couldn't be seen from the street, the folks
Mhm.
in that shop would wait till we closed up our doors and walk us to our cars, and we were never, ever in danger. And
Wow.
I
Mhm.
completely appreciated it. They kept an eye out for us. I was sad when they moved to a
Right.
different location,
Right.
honestly. But it
Yeah.
is something to think about.
It is something to
So,
think about. I
mhm.
mean, I think all of our biases, just all of our biases in general need to be thought about, but especially if you're going to work with law enforcement officers, to be okay with them having their weapons, it would be like saying, could you leave your arm in the car? I mean, it would just
Right.
be, it's kind of silly.
Mhm. Absolutely. Or telling a firefighter if
I
you
do
pass an
appreciate,
accident not to stop.
yeah, no, I do appreciate it though when law enforcement officers let me know that they're no longer carrying because they don't want the responsibility, and they don't want the responsibility of carrying, and they no longer feel like they're constantly in danger. And I feel like that is amazing and that is wonderful, because as soon as I get them to, not everybody in the world has a proctological personality disorder. Not everyone in the world is out to get us. In fact, the majority of people in the world are either benign or they're pretty good people. I
Mhm.
feel like I've really done great work.
You
Um,
have.
yeah,
I'll never forget the look from the federal law enforcement officer that I was working with the day they saw me the week they retired, and they came in short because normally they had their gun holster on their
right.
ankle, and they had a loose shirt on and there was no holster underneath. And I said, wow, totally different look. And they said, it's weird and it feels so good
Yeah,
not to have to do that
right,
anymore. I didn't know.
right. So
So,
much
yeah,
nicer.
so much nicer. Kate, thank you for being here. And
Absolutely.
the group is going to be so glad to have heard from you. And they've got the reading list that you provided, and
Good.
they are going to have some assignments based on this. And I totally appreciate it. I'm totally in your debt. And I'm so
Oh,
glad I get to call you a friend as well as a
yeah,
colleague.
me also.
Thank you
I
for being here.
appreciate you.
I'm
Okay.
gonna I'm gonna turn off the recording now.
Okay.
If I can figure out how to do that without. Here we go.